Welcome to the Maverick podcast. I'm your host, Kathy Rose. And as always, a big shout out to all the free spirits, the independent thinkers, and the amazing Mavericks walking their unique path. I have a really interesting guest today. She's a fellow astrologer, so she's a colleague, and she has an amazing and brilliant mind. She's extremely accomplished, and of course, she's a Maverick. And I'm very much looking forward to this conversation as we explore the world of Maverickism. Her name is Jenn Zahrt. Come on board, Jenn.
Hello, hello.
You are currently president of one of the biggest astrological organizations. Actually, I think it is the biggest, the International Society for Astrological Research, which is called ISAR. And you've just been elected president. Congratulations. So what I want to ask you is, in this role of being president of the biggest astrological org, what Maverick ideas do you have for where astrology is going? Where's it headed? And not only just ISAR, but astrology in general, because now you get some say-so in this. You get to direct it. You get to follow this flow.
Yeah, it's not a one-woman show. It's very much a team or effort in this current status of the organization itself. I really love the current board and who I'm working with to help this become real. And together we've created a new way of gathering. You know, there's a lot of Zoom fatigue in this day and age, and there's kind of this sense of not another webinar on a weekend. Oh my gosh. So going back to another Maverick moment in my life, there was at the Gallatin School of Individualized Study, where I went to college, the dean had said at one point, she had never seen more than 10% of the student body in one place outside of graduation, because it was a school of individualized study. So it was literally a college of Mavericks. Like, people were doing what they wanted and they didn't have a need to get together or a reason to come together. And so I took that as a challenge, saying, okay, how can we create an event that would get so many different people in the same space at the same time? And, you know, taking thought about how interdisciplinary studies needs that kind of, you know, need to decide, right? You need to choose, like, okay, well, I have this much time in my schedule, I'm going to come in. I asked that we together as the student council, but, you know, I was thinking, let's have the whole building for a day. Let's open the building at 9 and close it at 7 and see this whole entire day unfold and just see who comes in, and we'll take over every classroom and there'll be different things in every classroom. We got 25% of the student body to come in. And that had never been done before. And so I thought to myself, you know, with this Zoom fatigue, like, we need a different kind of gathering that's like that one, because astrologers are by default interdisciplinary. We've got mundane astrologers, horary, medical, magical. There's so many different kinds of astrology unfolding now, and so many different kinds of astrology that were unfolding in the 20th century that we've forgotten, with this lean heavily towards the classical revival that I'm trying to remind us, you know, even with the sources that are here at Kaylee. You know, there's so many beautiful interdisciplinary things that astrology can be a part of. So I thought the event itself needs to reflect that. And so this coming weekend, by the time this airs, it might have already passed, but we will be doing them every quarter. We're having something called a Taste of ISAR, where we're inviting people to come and have different variety of, it's almost like a cabaret. Like, you know, there's going to be a Q&A session. There's going to be, how do we enter the chart? Something that's a little more oriented for beginners to get themselves into the chart with leading examples. And the other thing that I think is important about it, and that draws upon my experience having studied German in the context of interdisciplinary studies, is that there's a huge blind spot in the interdisciplinary world with foreign language, because they say, okay, well, you can study all of the different fields of knowledge, but then when you add the element of foreign language into it, it complicates things. So with ISAR specifically, we have global directors, we have affiliated schools, we have all of these ways that we have an international community, but there's a way to bring it together using current technological tools of translation so that we can truly cross the language barrier. Like, we live at a very powerful time where in this very first event happening, we're going to have a Spanish conversation translated real time into English, and Zoom will allow us to have a cross-pollination. So anyone attending can hear at least the English version or the Spanish version, and we're instantly reaching a whole entire new linguistic community. And as we move forward, people who are coming from different places in the world can show up as themselves and not have to have a command of English and, you know, break through this kind of dominance of English as default, right? So I really see it's very important to help astrologers commune in ways that allow us to almost be like the United Nations of astrology, where you have those headphones and it's like I can understand it in my language, but the person speaking is speaking their own language, even though it's astrology and we think of that as like a universal language. I'm very sensitive to linguistic barriers and honoring people in the way that they speak and listening, like, what does it sound like when two Russian astrologers are just speaking their own tongue? You know, what does it sound like for Turkish astrologers to be speaking Turkish and we get to witness them and hear them? And if we need translation by caption or even audio, we get that. And then we're really seeing the whole person and not just this filter through, you know, this hegemony of English, you know. So that's one element.
It's a beautiful, innovative idea. And your background is full of books. And this is part of what I want to explain to people. You have the Celestial Arch Education Library, correct?
Yes.
And that's what's behind you. You've collected astrology books from just a whole range, and people can come in and peruse the library, right?
Yeah, it's a membership-based research archive and library. And I wanted to create a place where all of the astrology books that we need to do research are in one place, because when I was doing my PhD, I could not find the astrology texts that I needed without waiting for interlibrary loan. And I think that the access hinders the advancement. So I started collecting collections and they erupted into this, which is a whole story. But this is...
Well, and this is a nice segue, because I was going to say you have your doctorate, and what I have is that it's in German literature. Is that correct?
It's technically German. The department itself had two sides, the linguistics and the literature. So everybody had the same PhD, but two very different curricula behind it. And I did specialize in German literature, but you wouldn't see that on the degree itself.
Okay. But what I find interesting is somehow, and I can't remember, I think it was in a podcast you were speaking, because, by the way, to all the listeners, Jenn has her own podcast called Within Orb, and it's astrologically oriented, talking about astrology books.
Yeah.
Somewhere on there, I heard that your thesis has something to do with astrology. So, and the reason I'm mentioning this is because that's very Maverick.
Yeah.
That's bold. That's courageous. You probably shook things up. And I want to hear about this.
So that all got started in the late 90s when I began learning astrology. I was grounded. So the Maverick stuff started with disobeying my parents. And I fell in love with astrology and wanted to study it in college. And Kepler College was not open at that point, but my first astrology teacher was Gary Lorenzen, who was the curriculum designer for Kepler. And I thought to myself, you know, I have to find a way to be able to study astrology at the bachelor's level, maybe even master's or doctorate. And he said, that doesn't exist because astrology's been kind of outcast out of the official realms of what knowledge is, right? And that really irritated me. So I took it as a challenge. And I said, you know what? I'm going to find a way to do it anyway. I will find an interdisciplinary program. I will make astrology the center of my focus, and I'm going to run this ball all the way down to the touchdown. Like, I was going to make sure it could. I always brought astrology up in every class I took. And all of the professors were like, with a rare exception, they were just like, what's with her? Why does she keep talking about this? So I tried to find a way to make astrology the central part of my thesis. And midway through the PhD, I thought, I should have been in an anthropology department where I could talk about astrology more overtly. But then I realized, for some reason, because I was in a department of fiction, right? I was reading stories that were supposed to be not true because they're novels, right? That the fact that astrology isn't real or true according to the powers that be didn't matter. And then you can study in terms of like cultural studies, you can study what astrology is doing with our imaginal worlds and the stories we can tell with it, and the fact that every single human culture has a way of talking about it in some fashion. So that was the angle, was that I could say the astrological imaginary, like the culture of the kinds of stories we tell with astrology, became completely fair game in a literature department.
All right. So you just very much defined Maverick. Just by your explanation, you know, they said no, and you basically said, I'm going to do it anyway. Let me convince you. You pushed the rules. You created waves. You stuck to your original idea, and you probably expanded their vision quite a bit.
Yeah, I think it rippled out to people. The fun part in the early days of the PhD program was that in German culture, from the year 1200 to about the Enlightenment, astrology permeated everything.
Mhm.
So when you focus on it and you highlight it, suddenly others are getting, oh, that's what that means. And it's like, yes, you cannot actually interpret this text unless you know about the role of astrology in culture at that time. And it became a kind of, I wouldn't say out professoring the professors, but it shows you how infused astrology is throughout human culture. And without knowing it, our ability to interpret the past is hindered.
Mhm. That is amazing because what this also illustrates, and it's something I've brought up in other podcasts, but I want to really focus on today, is the role that confidence and courage plays in being a maverick. Because, mavericks they push boundaries. They ask questions, they challenge traditions. That is the maverick personality. That is the need profile of somebody with maverick energy. And it takes guts. You have to be brave because you're not going to always be accepted. You're not always going to get the nods of approval. You're going to probably crash up against some walls.
Mhm.
Yeah, and you
Yeah.
did that.
Yeah, it was such a passionate love for astrology and actually a kind of ferocious defense of its being prejudiced against
Mhm.
from or by people who were bullying the field. And, that's not real, that's pseudoscience. And it's like, you don't even know what you're talking about. And
Mhm.
you're casting it out of the circle, And so I saw it very much as this kind of championing the cause in a way and sort of allowing others to understand like unless you have a working knowledge of this thing that is being cast out, you can't really say it's not real and doesn't work. And what I found over the years is that the people who are the most skeptical turn into the best astrologers.
Yes. That I've seen that also. But the fact of the matter is you're wired for this frequency. You're wired for the need to push things forward in an exciting and adventurous way and to stay original and that's the other thing. I have a whole list of um, people who are mavericks in politics, and we can talk about this when we get there.
Yeah.
But you get an original idea, and that is what a key part of being a maverick is staying original.
Hmm.
Having the spark, having the electricity that flows through you that gives you the light bulb idea.
Yeah.
Then the next step is, are you courageous enough to follow it, even if you butt up against problems? So you did that. Not everybody who watches this podcast or listens to it has an astrological background. However, for those who do, of course, part of the Maverick signature is always going to be the planet Uranus in the natal chart. Uranus will stand out in some way. Um, and I know you have that. I know I have that. And it's fascinating. This amazing ability you have to download electrical signatures of new ideas, okay, because that's a Maverick thing. And then to be able to work with the board of directors, your team, and then make it so, bring it out into the world. All of that requires certain skills beyond Uranus. But, I sat today because I love going down rabbit holes. So, I got one of my little spontaneous ideas and I said, I got to check maybe some of the past ISAR presidents, but also US presidents or world leaders, because world leaders and US presidents, whatever, not all of them are only going to have Maverick signatures. You have to have some Saturn, you usually have to have some Pluto thrown in
Yeah.
there in order to cooperate and bring it about. But
Hmm.
the original ideas, and Mavericks need to be in charge usually. Mavericks work best if they're in charge or if they're working solo,
Hmm.
um, because that allows you to go at your speed.
Yeah.
So, I was looking at this, and for those who are not astrologically oriented, they won't know these two people, or three people I'm going to mention. Ray Merriman was a past president of ISAR. He has Uranus opposite Mercury. It's
Hmm.
amazing how many times leaders will have Uranus Mercury contact, right? Because that's spontaneous, new, original ideas. Alexander, I always mess up his last name. Imsarajek? No, how do you say his name?
I think you had it inserted.
I got it. Oh, God. Yes, Sun opposite Uranus. Even in Seattle, one of the big astrological names who puts on huge conferences, Laura Nalbandian, has Uranus conjunct her ascendant. So we see this theme. Then when you look at presidents now and in the past, I mean, Joe Biden has a Maverick signature, Saturn Uranus on his descendant. Of course, Donald Trump, you cannot, anybody will know he's a Maverick. He's high electricity. You can't control him. He's spontaneous. He's all over the place. Sun Uranus opposite moon. And the list goes on and on and on and on. Ronald Reagan had Uranus Oriental. I would also suggest to the astrological community that they pay attention to when Uranus is Oriental as a key signature for Maverick people. When I was looking at your resume, it says publisher, editor, author, translator, and metalsmith.
Yep.
So I have to ask you about metalsmithing.
So when I was in graduate school, I was near a place called the Crucible in Oakland. And one of my coping mechanisms with the heavy academics was to do something physical. And athletics and art have always been those two things that are not brain for me that I can sink into. And I had been on the cycling team, but one of my best friends had a fatal accident, and I then left the cycling team because it was too hard for me to continue. And after that point, I thought to myself, I'm so close to this amazing industrial art school. Why don't I pivot back to the art side of things? And I've always painted and done art in my life. It's been a very big thing for me. I had oil painting lessons in second grade, for example. I went to the Crucible and became a volunteer coordinator. So I was working with their main their paid staff. I was the volunteer coordinator underneath him, managing a core 3,000 volunteers that were coming through this place. They used to do a fire arts festival. So there's that Promethean, right? There's fire arts with the forge. And then they let you, if you volunteered enough hours, they let you take free classes. And I thought, in my grad student budget, that's my right price. I have time, I don't have money, so I'll volunteer my time and I'll get to take these classes. And I ended up taking these jewelry making classes that really that reaches back to one class I took in college. I did take one jewelry making class and I loved it, but it was quite challenging at that time to, navigate the academics and the sort of art world. And my major was more towards the leading to the German degree. So I found myself back in the world of metalsmithing and volunteering, and it was amazing to learn silver casting. Back in the days when in the 30 Years' War in the 1600s in Germany, people couldn't just carry around their money. So they would melt their silver down into objects and carry the object around that would be sort of their precious item, right? And so I thought, I can mobilize some of my academic studies by learning some of the crafts that they're doing. And then there's this film called Golem, Wir in die Welt kam. It's about a golem being brought to life by a rabbi in 16th century Prague. And I was like, I'm going to carve a mini golem in wax and then cast that and bring it to life while I'm writing the chapter about that entity, right? And there's astrology in the movie. So that's one of the chapters of my thesis, is I talk about how astrology was in the culture around the movie, but then also found its way into the plot of the movie. And then I was also making this miniature silver sculpture at the same time. So it was kind of this fun way of being in the material world and not just in the mental world.
Using all of your senses.
Yeah.
Living it deeply in every sense possible. Yeah. How do these ideas come to you? Because this is what's interesting to me, the process that Mavericks go through when they get these new ideas. And I love listening to people and how they receive these light bulb flashes, for something they want to expand or bring about that has never been done.
You can feel it in the body, even though I like to think of it as in the mind. But if the mind is the whole self, then it is a total experience in that way. There was a moment when I was learning astrology the first time. One of my first books was The Great Year by Nick Campion. And I think I've said this in public before, and I work with him every week anyway, but we're very close. And I thought to myself, how do I grow up and be the German version of Nick Campion? Is there a job description for that? Because I saw this gap in the history of astrology in Germany wasn't being brought over into the English-speaking world. And that one moment when I was 15, this instant, it was very much like this, if you want to think of it as maybe my daimon was intervening in some fashion. But at the moment, it just was this clear sense of I know what I want to be when I grow up, and I don't know how it's going to happen, but it's going to happen. And I just have to keep having it in my presence or something. And I did at some points give up or sort of let it go because I thought there was in one little eddy, no way forward. And it chose me again. It came back around to me. So it was like an interesting feeling, knowing,
Mm-hmm.
faith, a kind of, I'm now describing the sign that my Uranus is in. So there's that.
Uh-huh.
But
Yeah.
yeah,
It's palpable though, and it's a jolt. And then again, the next stage is, are you going to be obedient to the signal? Are you going to act? And
yeah.
often with people who have any kind of Uranus signature, there is this need to sort of be in the present moment, cool your jets, be here now, so you can receive the lightning bolt idea or the flash of insight. Because if you're not present, if you're thinking about the past or worried about the future, if your consciousness is all over the place, you miss the signal. So for Mavericks, I think it's very important. You talk to anybody who has these incredible ideas, and they will say, yeah, my mind was kind of empty at the time and it just popped in
Yeah.
or it came to me or flowed through my consciousness. But it was in one of those empty spaces. Like sometimes when I'm dusting my house, that's when I get things, or I'm walking
Yeah.
and I'm not thinking about anything in particular. Sometimes I will have placed my order along, the period of time before, like, I really need to figure this out. I really need to come up with the title of my next lecture or whatever it happens to be. And it's when I let it go and I come back to present moment and I do something distracting that it'll pop in. And
Yep.
it's so common for Mavericks. As I talk to them, I hear this again and again and again.
It's also the shower. I think something about running water, shifting the electricity around the body or something. It's just like,
Mm-hmm.
just in the shower, it's like, whoa, hey, yeah, no, there we go. There's the next iteration, you know.
One of the things that I would like to teach someday, and I've seen it in my mind over and over again, the time hasn't come, but someday I'm either going to do my own conference called the Intuitive Astrologer or a long workshop called the Intuitive Astrologer, where we talk about how intuition plays a role in astrological consultation. I don't, because I teach intuition. I teach people how to activate it, how to understand it. And when you're in a consultation, sometimes when your mind is blank and you're really present with the client,
Yeah.
you'll see things, you'll know things, you'll hear things, you'll feel things that are not related to astrology, but that are resonance between you and the client.
Yeah, one time, I mean, that happens a lot for me actually, and it surprises me when it does happen because I tend to veer mostly towards, my one of my astrology teachers was Rod Susskind, and he's all about the rules. He literally wrote the rules
Oh,
of chart interpretation as a book. And then the things will occur to me like, secondary, well, I guess your audience is not so astrological, but I'll see something where I'm like, oh, there's going to be a career change, but you're going to do something you don't even know on the other side of this time period, what you're going to be doing. Like maybe it's going to be like competitive crochet. And the client's like, how did you know that I just started crocheting? And I'm like, I
yes.
literally don't have any idea about that. But it came out and it was just being in the
Yes.
moment and the flow, like something in the noose just got it
Yeah.
out of me. I don't
That
know.
is a great example, and I'm cheering that you allowed that to come through, because what I would like to see is a little bit more education for astrologers so that they give that permission, because it's a key and central concept. In fact, I did a consultation yesterday for a man in Australia. And at the very end, I was just kind of in that channel mode of just free forming and jamming. And I said a specific word that I never use, and his eyes just became huge. And he said, "Why did you use that word?" I said, "I'm not sure exactly." And he said, "That's the name of my company."
Wow.
And I went, "Oh, okay, good. Well, that's why I used it. It was,
But I want to
wellness
ask you
woman."
in your moment, you said you don't know why you used it. What was your feeling when it came through though, that specific word?
Mhm.
How would you
It
describe that?
It was, I was trying to educate him on the next wave of development coming up for him. And he
Hmm.
has a lot of Uranus transits and solar arcs happening in his chart. So of course, there's going to be adventure. There's going to be the need to be in the present moment so he can receive this information. Because see, that's the thing. Anytime we go through a Uranus transit or solar arc, we learn that process of being present so that we can receive the download.
Hmm.
Okay. So I was trying to describe this to him, and I said, the way I described it, I use that word. I've never used that word in my life, ever. So I just thought that was really, really fascinating. And it just came through. So for
Yeah.
me, I have to go mindless.
It's a mindless. Okay, you said you have to go mindless.
I have to relax. And for me, it is the security of knowing that I have enough experience in a consultation. Well, as a matter of fact, what happened with this man, I always start a consultation saying, let me confirm your birth data.
Uh-huh.
Because there have been times when I've typed it in wrong, times when I can't read my own writing, times when they've typed it in wrong. So I
Yeah.
told him, you're born, here's your day, month, and year. And I said the whole thing, and he goes, yeah, that's right. Except he wasn't really paying attention because I said, you were born in 1978. He was really born in 73.
Whoa, that's quite a shift.
Mm-hmm. And so we're talking, and later he said, I'm, well, at my age, and he listed his age, and I went, that's not the age I have you. And I said, were you born in 78? No, I was born in 73, which required me to say, pause the recording. I need to recalculate your chart. Now, I happen to have enough experience, and the Maverick part of me and the way my brain works, sometimes I'm actually better if I take the chart and just do it right then and there
Oh yeah.
with no prep at all. You know
Same.
that, right? You
Oh
do,
yeah. No,
yeah.
I do that a lot actually with clients, or they'll
Mhm.
ask me a question and I'm like, oh, the answer to this question isn't here. Let me just calculate something really quick. And then it
Yes.
feels like gymnastics.
Yes. And
Yeah.
I've been criticized by some astrologers saying, you must be a terrible astrologer and you're just making this up. I said, no, it's how my brain works,
Right.
and I have enough experience where I could do that.
A lot of
Yes.
times when I'm teaching, I have those moments of accuracy, but it feels opaque to me
Yeah.
because I don't get a sense of clairaudience or clairvoyance or any of that. It's more like, it's a feeling in the body of when you're kind of in your flow or whatever, but it's
Mm-hmm.
opaque. And you don't know whether what you're going to say is going to resonate with the person. There's no like actual, in my mind, or at least where I'm at with it now, opaque is the best word to describe it because there's no sense of like, oh, I know this is going to resonate. It's more like I know what the symbols are. I know how to read. I know what, to
Mm-hmm.
guide through the pathway of the conversation and invite the person participating to participate. But then they'll say, how do you know that? And I'm like, I don't. It's
Exactly.
an opacity. I don't know if it's like that for you. I was
Well,
curious.
one of the things I teach is that there are four intuitive senses, not
Yeah.
just one. That psychic sensing is not just there's not just one way to get it. There are four different channels. We have five physical senses. I think we have four intuitive senses.
Okay.
And I think everybody has those. I call it a gift order. So there's
Mhm.
one of the senses that will be your primary sensing modality. So one of the senses, and you just talked about it, I call it prophecy. It doesn't mean you're sensing the future. Prophecy has this specific signal of knowing, knowing, and you don't know why you know. Pops into your head. It's sudden, it's immediate. There's no signal behind it, so it requires great courage to trust it because it's not like a physical feeling or a vision or a voice in the head. It's just boop,
Mhm.
I know what I know.
Yeah.
Um, so opaque is that
Okay.
knowingness, that instantaneous knowingness.
Mm.
Then there's also psychic vision, which means sometimes I will get clues because I'm high in vision. So I will see a person and a lot of information or watch their body language, or I'll look at the chart and it triggers information, or I'll
Yeah.
get images. A picture will pop in. Like the other day, I said, what does Iceland have to do with your reality right now? Because I kept seeing Iceland on the map. And she goes,
Wow.
we're going there in 2 months.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's just, I saw it. And so what the heck? I
Mhm.
don't care if I'm wrong. I don't care if I'm wrong. My goal is not to be right. My goal is to be
Yeah,
of service.
I love that.
But, so when we use our intuitive senses, it will come through in certain ways. For people high in the audience, they'll usually hear a voice in their head, or they'll get words, or they'll say, it makes sense. What I'm hearing in my own head is this, it
Mhm.
converts it to language. And then, of course, feeling is physical in the body.
Mhm.
The high empathic people, which usually then you're going to see a Neptunian signature in the chart somewhere,
Right.
as the empath. And I suspect you have some of that where, you will feel what other people are projecting, um, just just from what I see in you, it feels like that would make sense. And the high empathic people, when you convert astrology to life purpose, what does this chart say you are here to heal or resolve or build or learn? For people who are super high empaths, high in psychic feeling, I think what they're here to learn is how to learn how to turn it on and turn it off on command.
Oh,
How to manage it.
yeah.
How to manage it. You know how many women I know who are high empathic because women are given permission to jump into the sensitivity with both feet. Men are not given as much permission, so they struggle with it more.
Right.
But the empathy is so strong, they don't know how to turn it off. They can't even go to the grocery store without becoming overwhelmed with other people's energy. I say, I can teach you how to turn it on and off on command. Then you're in charge and you're not being victimized. So, there's so many factors and we need mavericks. We need people who adhere to rules. We do. We need people who want to have rules and can come up with structures, and we need people to challenge them too. I mean, we need the whole spectrum. But I think, one of the things that stands out to me the most, and when I started this podcast, I got people who said, thank you for talking about this, because I've always been different. I've always been oriented in the Maverick spectrum, but I struggled because it doesn't always give me approval. It's like you proposing your thesis having to do with astrology. I can just imagine what the academic reaction was. I can just imagine it. It's like, go ahead.
Here's a fun story. So the fifth person on my committee, he said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to have fun here, and we're going to actually have you read a chart during your Viva. And I was like, yes, let's do that. And so he was being a maverick as well, trying to push back against the German department. He was coming from the history of science department, and I was one of his last students. So he was ready to just, go for it and do whatever. And so we did read a chart. I think it was a 15th century prince. And I told the Kepler College about it right away. Nick was still on the board, and I had contact with them. And I'm like, you guys aren't going to believe this, but I just read a chart during my Viva at Berkeley. And they were like, whoa. And I got in the newsletter at that point, and it was big fanfare around that. But he was aligned with this kind of, renegade vision that I had to kind of, get astrology on the map at a place like Berkeley.
So I love the fact that you were one of his last students. He was getting ready maybe to retire.
Yeah.
And he just threw caution to the wind and said, what the heck? I'm going to be my original self. There's a ripple effect. And to people who carry the Maverick signature, they create ripples, and sometimes we don't see the results of the ripples right away, but it's also seed planting. You plant seeds, it creates that ripple, and whether the action or the change happens right at that moment, or it takes 2 or 3 years or much later, that's what's happening. And the butterfly effect, I think, is what they call it.
Yeah. And when you say the nowness is important, I have to admit, I'm also living with a permanent sense of the vision of the end goal for what I do. So literally everything I do is somehow part and parcel to this vision I have, but the components that it will take to enact that require the whole community to get together. So creating possibilities and avenues for that to happen is really, really important, because it's too big of a vision to do alone. Yeah. And I'm joining it with the community that preceded me, because when I came into the community, my very first teacher was creating curriculum, which is already for unborn people, so he was working for people who didn't exist yet, and I'm working for people who don't exist yet. But so, I mean, I have this now, yes, and also this like 40 years from now. I mean, I'm already thinking about like at the very end of my living life, what can I get done before then, and then how can we get more people on board to keep it going after that,
And that's so all part of the process.
An interesting
so
tension.
you get this big picture, you get this big idea, this big plan, you create an outline, you write it down, and then you come back and say, how am I going to jam with reality, and when is the timing right? And that's a very important part of Uranus energy, and the Maverick is to I call it putting your car in park or putting your car in neutral and letting it idle.
Yeah.
Until you get the signal to put it in drive and step on the gas. So
Right.
you're literally just idling, boop, 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 waiting for the do it now. Phew, and then
Yeah.
you take off. But yeah, you have to have the structure, the idea, the impatience is what sometimes gets in my way.
Yeah.
And it's the excitement of receiving the idea.
Hmm.
The
Yeah.
hardest thing for me, you're more obviously wired to working with organizations and structures and cooperating. You probably have a lot of air in your chart. I have none, except for my
Okay.
midheaven. So for me, it's more independent need to
Hmm.
do that. So the hardest part for me is when I get one of those ideas and the time says right, and if I have to ask for permission or get other people to cooperate, that's hard for me. And I want to foster more of that in people, more of the independent thinking in this highly polarized time right now,
Hmm.
right? We're in the
Yeah.
middle, of a U.S. election. Politics has become very contentious and polarized, and reactionary.
Hmm.
And it would be nice if more people could actually just speak to each other without the reactionary, allow each other to be independent thinkers. That's really where I'm going with this.
Yeah. I think maybe though that independence is one sort of like facet of this that technology has overdone in that we used to all listen to the same radio. We used to all listen to the same or watch the same kinds of media streaming through the cathode ray tube, right? So, and now we each have our own Spotify this and my app that and my streaming this. And so we have actually become just like fractured from each
It's the
other's
exact
reality
word I was going to
tunnel.
say was fractured. Yes.
Yeah. And so we don't have a common ground the way that used to be structurally embedded in society. So there is no common point of contact. Like I have no idea what anybody under the age of 20 is reading or doing or looking at. I mean, might be because of all the things I'm doing. I don't have time to investigate it. But, in the olden times, like this was the show on that channel at this time. And that's what you just had to live with, right? You didn't really get to have that individual choice. And people don't remember that anymore. Especially, I mean, there are many people who have never lived in that world, actually. So
Right.
I think that contributes to this, lack of ability to have a common ground because we're not even having a common conversation on other levels of society.
And then we're also overbuzzed with information and a lot of disinformation.
Yeah.
At this point, the Maverick part of me questions everything I read. Everything.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't
It's become,
automatically believe anything at this point. I have to research it and make sure it's accurate, but we risk because we're in a team mentality. I'm part of this team, you're part of that team. We risk believing whatever our team promotes.
right.
And well, I don't have a team. That's the other thing for me is I don't think I even have a team anymore.
Yeah.
I'm floating around just going, I'm just going to observe everything.
Yeah, it's harder
But
to share on social media when anything can be scraped, right? So any
yeah,
bot or company can come up with a new way of bypassing whatever setting you've got set up. And I find it increasingly difficult to be showing up in the same ways online as I think we all used to when it was early days. And now with AI and image generation and even text generation, it's like I don't want to give that to the world unless it's
mm,
it's like the personal stuff stays really personal now. I think we're moving
yeah,
into a time when that's going to become increasingly real.
yes. And this is a very, very important conversation because we're just on the edge of it. It's like the feeling of the other shoe getting ready to drop. You can feel it coming, like you feel right before there's a rainstorm. It's in the air, and it's like that with AI right now and
Yeah.
this dynamic shift. Well, Jenn, you are a classic and beautiful and wonderful example of somebody who is an independent thinker and a creator, because there's a creative process in this that's very important. And, you've already exhibited many wonderful, spectacular successes being a maverick, and I'm sure there's so many more coming up. And I'm glad to know you, and I'm glad that you are doing this great work in astrology. But thank you so much for everything you've shared because
Thank you.
It's been a really good conversation, and I wish you well. And by the way, so people can contact you. What is your website? JennZahrt.com, right?
Mm-hmm. JennZahrt.com. A lot of
Hey,
times my last name gets misspelled, so that's another
yeah.
sort
Is it
of
German?
navigating the world. Yes, and it means tender, but we're German, so it's kind of like bittersweet, like Tiny Tim or Little John. But yeah, it means tender or lovely.
All right. Well, go do your good work.
Thank
Go
you.
make the world a better place
Thank you
with
for
your
having me on.
creative
It was
ideas.
amazing.
Yeah. Until we meet again. Bye for now.